Hello ladies and gents, so this is going to be a quick video on underwater lighting and atmosphere. This is a very simple scene that's been put together with some basic settings. It's not quite full quality, but it's already taken 10 minutes to render off. Expect for a full quality version with all the trimmings and little details and stuff like that to actually probably take more along the lines of 30 minutes to render off. One of the first things that you should think about with regards to underwater lighting is that when you're in the regular atmosphere, in the above water, you have a fall off of light that basically goes like this. You see blue light first, and as it has to pass through more and more atmosphere, you're left with the yellows and reds and oranges and all those kind of things. And that's why you see sunsets and sunrises the way that you do, where you're seeing all these warmer colors. And then during the midday you see all this blues. Is because at the point where the sun is going around the horizon, it's traveling through more atmosphere, which means the blue gets redirected off, and the red values are the ones that make it all the way through, so you get these warmer colors. Now when you're underwater, and if you look at some underwater photography websites and whatnot, they'll tell you that it's the inverse that is true in terms of underwater. So red light, yellow light, etc., those values tend to peter off the deeper that you go, and it's the blue light that tends to survive the most. So as you're lighting, you want to probably think about this. Now in this particular case, I on purpose went ahead and created a little red light down here, because most of the lighting here is bluish, greenish colors that are sitting in here. And it was just an idea of adding like an emergency flare, but to add that little bit in there. And its fall off, it doesn't really influence a large amount of the area, which is what should be happening. So of course with my lighting I'm using quadratic fall off. In the case of this particular flare, you'll see an intensity of 1, but that's a little bit misdirecting. What I've done here for the flare is I've actually set it to a value of 2 for intensity for its value. And when you're doing this, make sure never to have it at full saturation. In fact, most of the time you don't ever want to use a full saturation on any of the colors that you use. You always want to go to lower saturation, even if they're supposed to be saturated values. Tend to keep them, around 0.9 or lower. The reason for this is when it pushes itself to higher and higher power, if I were to increase the intensity of this, I would get a white light in the center rather than a red light, which is what you should expect to see in terms of real lighting response. With regards to my other lights in the scene, I've got an intensity of 3 here. This guy's sitting right next to my camera, just directly in front, and this is representing the digress light. So a flash bulb or a light that is hanging out on the side here, and you'll be used to seeing that in a lot of underwater photography. The references that you'll see, it'll be because the person's holding a large camera, and up off to the right or left will be a large light attached to the camera. So it's of course also got quadratic fall off going on here, and it's falling off into the environment. And it's creating some of this light in the foreground here. And then the rest of the light is coming from, basically, you could consider it a key light, but it's also working sort of as a fill light. It's doing everything at the same time. And its intensity is just set to 1. It's just regular white. It's basically the default light settings for a directional light when you create one. And I just rotated it in a slightly different angle. That's about it. And it's come in to basically give you a little bit of light in the scene, give it a bit of direction to it. But you'll notice that even though at the intensity of 1 and with the value of white, it is not very strong at all. And this is due to the volume that I've got rendering here. So let's take a look at that. So I've used a fluid here. There is a Maya fog that's available. If you go to the Maya render settings, you can add a fog there. It's a simple depth fog. It doesn't respond to light. You don't want to use the light fog that comes with my either usually looks like donkey butt. That's a personal opinion, of course, but you can sometimes cheat it. You can sometimes make it look okay for doing sort of God rays in an environment, but in this particular case, there's lots of sediment and silt and stuff being kicked up underneath, assumedly anyways. You'll find some photos where the underwater setting is actually really quite clear, but in this particular case, I went for one of the examples where there was a lot of sediment and it looks like there's this deep fog going through the entire thing, so that's what I used it for. Now the fluids will respond to light naturally in that even at low intensities of the fog, when you have lots of light, it will create sort of an outer glow around those lights. And so that's what we're picking up here, is that we're getting some of that fall off depth going up back here, but we're also picking up a halo, and it's causing also a halo around this light source. A lot of this glow that we're seeing here is coming from that light source as well. And again, that's part of the natural film response that we would expect to see from underwater lighting. So a lot of this haze is not actually the stuff going far off into the distance. That haze is actually coming from the close up fog itself being illuminated by that light off to the side. As we look through the scene, we notice there's a lot of particles in here, and these particles have just been emitted from a simple plane. I've got about 200 being emitted. I added a gravity and turbulence filter for these guys, or fields, not filter, because I was initially going to do some animation with it, but I gave up on that idea, and I just went as a still. So you don't really need to have these guys in here other than just trying to get them in place. Along with all of this, if we go to the hypershade, got the camera pulled up here, I've got an MI exposure simple set up for dealing with the gamma correction for the final image. If you're taking this into a compositing program afterwards, you don't want to add this. You want to keep everything linear and render it at a 32-bit final render. And if you're taking it into something like Nuke or After Effects, you can go ahead and apply the gamma correction after you've done all the editing and stuff that you wanted to do with it. The MIA lens bokeh has been added in here, and this is going to depend on your own personal settings for your scene. So you could use these values, but it would only be worthwhile if you had the same scale as I'm using here. So the plane right now is set to be in focus at 7 units away. The radius is how much blur to add to it, and then the samples is the level of quality. Now I'm not sure you're going to be able to see it in the video here, but the edges here are fairly noisy still. That's because the samples are still fairly low. Probably up to 8 or 16 would probably bring this to an acceptable level. With all of these things combined, getting a feeling like underwater. So the blurring of information, the slight fog, all of those things help you sell the idea of underwater lighting, as well as the coloration that you use. Again, blues and greens would be most dominant in these kind of environments. And subtle lighting, if it's really bright and you're close to the surface, then you might see things like caustics that would show up in there, which would be the little kind of casting of light there. But with this much sediment and that stuff and how deep it is, the caustics would be far too blurry to really pick out anyways. There might be some subtle variations or animation to the light that might be visible, but ultimately it becomes just this big blur of soft light down here. Just as a quick example, I just wanted to bring up a couple of images to show you as a point of reference for what I'm talking about. One of the other things that I haven't incorporated into my final, which would probably have to be done in post anyways, is there's also a little bit of a glow off of these things. You notice that right here it's hitting quite hot in terms of the lighting, and it's creating this haze around it, this sort of glow, and you'll see this subtle glow, and it's maybe a little bit hard to pick out some of the time, but you can really notice it if you pay close attention. Maybe you do some adjustments in Photoshop, you might start to notice that it's there, and it's this subtle haze, and it's around any of the hot spots. That's part of the scattering of the light from the surface and hitting back into the area. So the light comes down and it travels straight, but then it scatters off in multiple directions, and it hits a lot of this sediment that's hanging in the air at a different angle, and it reflects back to us, creating this halo. It's part of that fog, and you can see that the fog doesn't allow you to see very far underneath, depending on the area that you're in. Here the depth is really extreme, the sense of depth, and you can tell that it's not really going very far. Again, what you should probably notice is, again, the cyans here, and then it's going to this greenish color here, and the cyans and blues, and it goes down, it fades down into these reddish regions. All your shadows are typically fairly soft as well. I made sure that my shadows were set to a fairly soft value. And a lot of things are really not in focus all of the time. Things tend to get fairly blurry fairly quickly under the water, so all this stuff, depth of field, it's not just because of the camera, it's also the environment. So take a look at an example, find the example that you like, and then try and follow that. Just as a quick note, and what kind of spawned this particular effort is the new website that I've created, which is CG Challenger's website. You can feel free to join us in the challenges. The goal of this particular website is, of course, to help people gain in their skills, give them a forum in which to continuously challenge themselves. And I've got a variety of different challenges that I've started putting together, and we're adding more. And if you have any ideas, you can add to that. And the idea of this set of challenges is unlike any other 3D challenge or 2D challenge that's out there, is that they're continuous. They don't actually have a time that they stop per se. What they have is a time limit, which you try and keep within, but you can start that time limit at any point during the year. So it won't be like, hey, I wanted to, do this challenge, but it was only for the month of July, and now it's over, and I can never do it again. These challenges are always here. You can do them at any time. It's really about trying to challenge yourself. And if you don't like any of the challenges here, we've created a wild card kind of challenge idea, where basically you just post down what your challenge is supposed to be, how you're challenging yourself, and we'll try and give you feedback. So give it a try if you like. That's where this challenge came up. Hope to see you there.